And tonight, some really intense Doctor Who debate that will get you behind the sofa as we go live with the Sensor channel at 6.
Well, there's always a gremlin. There's always a gremlin in the works. Maybe it's because we're doing politics. Well, good evening. I hope you're settled. Got your cup of tea. Maybe had your tea. Depends where you are in the world. You're having your breakfast. Whatever. You know, tonight is the big one with Doctor Who fans. You know, get two Doctor Who fans in a room and the politics will emerge. Whether it's the politics of the program, the politics of a story, or what they're trying to reflect about the time and whether you agree with it or not. And you know, everybody mentions Green Death, Curse of Peladon. These are the ones everybody waffles on about. We're going a bit deeper than that. We're going to go wider than that. And actually, why are we raising this topic now? Not because I've got any clickbait sensibilities here. It's because when we were trying to think of a program, so to speak, I'll come back to that, we basically heard Sylvester McCoy at the BFI when he was talking about the Happiness Patrol, talking about Doctor Who has always been political. Therefore, let's explore that. Let's test that out. So that's the plan tonight. Actually, as we're going to do that, you saw my slide there last Sunday. Everybody loved the Doctor Who Gold, the photographs, the rarely seen photographs. So the way I'm going to do the debate tonight is we talk about the politics of Doctor Who, which could sound a bit heavy, although we'll get light and shade in there. I'm also going to, if we reference a story, so say Green Death, you'll see some rarely seen pictures of Green Death. So there you go. Politics and rarely seen photographs of Doctor Who to coincide. Isn't that a beautiful harmony, yeah? So the thread's already alive. I will read you as much as I can and get you involved. Because it's politics, I dare say we've got some tasty stuff to say. So please share with us your thoughts. Has Doctor Who always been political? Okay. Please get those likes coming in now. Keep your notifications on. Give us a sub if you've forgotten to and you've just kind of lazily just been watching away there. Please, it's really appreciated. You can remember, get me on X at Sensorsphere and email me at sensorsphere@gmail.com. This is the last live program for a couple of weeks. There will be podcasts on because obviously I'm getting married and I'm going on holiday. So I will still see the emails, okay? Shh, don't tell anyone. So let's get going, eh? Let's get going. So I'm going to have that there as I bring on my panelists. We've got some fantastic panelists, I tell you. So this is what started the debate. It was put in the Radio Times, but at the BFI, Sylvester McCoy said, Doctor Who has always been political. And on the right-hand side there, you can see he gives us the detail, because we all know how these headlines work half the time. In the 60s, I got hooked on Doctor Who, and the reason why was because of the politics in it. Subtly put there. The 60s, they started to swing, they started to change. It was a kind of revolution, a peaceful and wonderful revolution. Right, so there you go. That's what we're going to kind of chew on. So let me get my friends in. And like I said, it's a hellishly good panel. So let's have a look. Let's bring him on. Hello, Simon Lydiard, founder of the Skaro fanzine and many, many more things in his life besides. But good to see you.
Good to see you. By the way, I'm near the banks of the River Thames. So there are dangers that Daleks may be coming towards me.
Have you got an exit strategy?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm going to go right over Westminster Bridge.
Yeah, you
can't. There'll be no Daleks on there.
Have you got stairs?
Yeah, unfortunately, where I live, there are lifts as well.
Elevate. And we've got back Michael Herbert, biographer of the Malcolm Hulke and many other things. So, Michael, good to see you back.
Welcome, Brendan, and everybody else who's joining us tonight. I'm definitely not near a river. I'm on some hills.
Well, hills. I'm trying to think. Oh, it could be like the valleys of Green Death, maybe. They always seem to mention the Green Death, don't they, with these blooming debates?
Oh, yeah.
And to complete our panel, we've got Michael from Solar One Sci-Fi Podcast. Hello, mate. How are you doing?
Hello, sir. How are you? Also, like Simon, where he was with the Daleks coming out of the sea, I'm right down in the south coast in Portsmouth, where the sea devils came out of the sea. So
Yes.
It's a kind of strange parallel there, but I just suddenly thought of that when Simon said what he was saying. So there you go.
Yeah, and it was one of our streams. We showed your photographs, didn't we, when you walked past that old sea base? Yeah,
yes, exactly. Very creepy. So yeah.
So I suppose let's get the definitions out the way, because this is such a debate that we want to be fair on this, so that we are not kind of getting all over the place. Now, obviously, this is no surprise, because wherever you go, whether it's academic theses, dissertations, or whether it's press, Doctor Who has always been linked with political and social consciousness, certain kind of arguments and messaging. For example, look at this. Even classic Doctor Who was a healthy cynicism towards politicians and politics in general, starting with a prehistoric morality play to the era where the script professed a desire to use the show to try and bring down Margaret Thatcher's government. In between, a lot of politicians made nuisances of themselves, especially during the John Pertwee era. So, yeah, Doctor Who always seems to go there. This from Aberystwyth University. Doctor Who 60. Show has always tapped into political issues, never more so than in the 70s, they say. And and of course, present day. We're trying not to go present day for once. Come on, this is Sunday tea time. We want to just talk about classic Who mostly. But yes, we know that there's a politics in the stories nowadays. We even have politicians of unsavory backgrounds there. And I suppose you could argue it's more identity politics now, more gender politics now in Doctor Who storylines, and with a tinge of racism like in Dot and Bubble. But let's have a look at, there we go. There's one definition. Politics, the activities of the government or people who try to influence the way a country is governed. And the last one, politics is the way that people living in groups make planned decisions. Politics is about making agreements between people. So, lads, as we go on this one, we can't just mention any Doctor Who story and go from pillar to pillar to pillar. What we need to do is, can we agree? What are we measuring when we look at Sylvester McCoy's statement when he said Doctor Who has always been political? What are we measuring? What do you reckon, Simon?
Well, I mean, I think when I kind of first saw Sylvester's quote, it surprised me, because I thought, well, we know all about the 1970s, we know all about the Barry Letts era, Malcolm Hawkins, etc. But was there any politics in Doctor Who in the 60s, particularly when it started? And I kind of thought, I didn't think there was, but then I thought about it a little bit more, and several things occurred to me. One is that everybody working on the show in 1963 had either served in the Second World War or been influenced by it in some way. So that's kind of background, and all culture, whether you explicitly reference politics or not, is influenced by it. So it would have been naturally influenced by it. I saw one of your quotes, which kind of seemed to reference the first story. I can't see a lot of politics in there, other than about the abduction of school children from Coal Hill School. But by the time we get to the second story, there you are. There's politics. There's the Daleks, written by Terry Nation. He didn't serve in the war, but he was a child in the war. He did his national service after the war. It's kind of fairly obvious that the Daleks are fascist. They're also in tanks. And by the way, it's also fairly obvious that Terry Nation nicked much of the concept of the time machine in his story as well. But so there's politics there. There's a sort of an anti-fascist message.
Yeah.
There's also an anti-pacifism message in there, very, very strong, which often goes overlooked. But the Doctor persuades the Thals that they need to fight. So there's an anti-pacifism message, which is, in a sense, a pretty obvious thing to do after the Second World War, a warning about fascism and a push to defend yourselves. So that's quite important. I won't go through a lot of other stories now, but I will just mention Dalek Invasion of Earth, if I may, which is, again, another Terry Nation story. It's a sort of desolated world. It appears to be a kind of like a post-war environment. What might have happened after the Second World War, had the Nazis won, you got freedom fighters. What's interesting as well is that the freedom fighters don't seem to be working for any form of official centralized government. It's a much more collective approach. They're ordinary people. You don't have kind of Winston Churchill in Canada directing it. It's ordinary people. So I would say certainly Dalek Invasion of Earth, there's quite a progressive message about how people can work together in their own defense. There's probably more we can say about the Hartley era, but I want to talk about historicals, but maybe I'll pause at that point.
Yeah, if you pause, because as we're still looking at the definition, because then we'll fly around like the clappers, right? So, for example, it all started with that caveman story, An Earthly Child, and you, Simon, referenced it, which is maybe the politics says is just the abduction of school kids, of course. It's said in jest, but the point is, I actually did think about the Unearthly Child, and some people do reference this, because if I came to you, Michael Ball, if we're talking about what is Doctor Who being political, I would say yes, this is, in my case, because I'm thinking it's about groups of people, it's about power play, and who had the secret to fire.
Yeah,
that was the whole story. And of course, whether it's you've got the latest gadget, whether you've got some great technology, boss in Green Death, you go through all this. It's just, who's got the power, what gives you the power, and you just see that played through. And the Doctor normally takes sides. Am I defining this correctly as we go here, or as Simon did actually talk about ideology as well, which comes into Doctor Who reflecting its time? But where do you stand on it, Michael?
I think basically that I agree with what Simon's been saying, but I'm also reading Mad May Cam, who's saying that Doctor Who isn't always political; it's also based on social commentary, which I think is a fair enough analysis. I think also the first race I thought of when we were going to talk about this was the Daleks, which of course Simon has already said was a great example of fascism and all that sort of stuff. So I think that it is interesting how Doctor Who uses sci-fi concepts in some degree to actually parallel political motives and political parallels. So if that's the best way I can really start off, I would sort of like to answer that question. Really, I think it is interesting. I think it's something which has always been prevalent. I didn't notice it so much in the 70s, which apparently is one of the highlights of it. But I know that it's still to a degree in current Doctor Who. So I guess really, but then I'm a big Star Trek fan, and there's a lot of politics in that sort of franchise as well. So it's not just simply just Doctor Who. A lot of science fiction series just put in political aspects into their storylines.
So what we're doing, I'm going to come to Michael Herbert just to round off. Remember, this is just set it in play, and I'm sure people in the thread appreciate that we're going to get right into the nuts and bolts, and of course we'll start really debating whether we agree with each other on various things, and of course, do we agree with Sylvester? Right. So Michael, when I come to you, Michael Herbert, where do you stand on, we are reacting to Sylvester saying Doctor Who was always political. So I'm asking you, what do you think is being political?
Well, as you might expect, I'll probably quote from Malcolm Hulke at this point. And he said in an interview that politics is about relationships between people. And it doesn't matter if one of the groups of people are reptiles. It's still political. So he took a kind of broader view of it. But I think a lot of and also said that in drama, you're always looking for conflict. So if you're writing a drama, there needs to be conflict, and often the conflicts in Doctor Who or many other series, any play, going back to Shakespeare, it's got to be conflict over certain ethical or moral issues.
Yeah, and
About power, status,
now
freedom,
I will always
slavery, things like that. So in terms of directly political issues, I don't think Doctor Who's really got them in that sense in the 60s. Certainly.
And this is where it gets tasty, because as we now start to proceed, we've kind of, I mean, I've not really defined, as I was talking to Michael Ball, I've kind of mentioned that I think it's about groups, who's got the power play and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But and so that's where it can sometimes, you know, hit on social commentary. But I've got 2 points here, and just to kind of test you briefly before where we go. Mad McCann says, I found the early show never promoted ideologies. It discussed them, but never forced them on you to the detriment of the story. Of course, you can see where we're all coming from. After 2024's season 1, people are feeling like, you know, what is Doctor Who trying to do to us? I suppose, Mad McCann, I'd be thinking of the Daleks, and it is talking about fascism and pacifism. So those are 2 ideologies, mighty beasts there. And Heather, good to see you as well. I think at the very least, Classic Who depicted both sides of the political coin, and often the Doctor had a difficult choice to make in choosing a side. That's not the case today. There's 2 examples from the thread where people can't help, just like me, to comment without thinking of where we've just come from. It is hard, this, isn't it? Absolutely hard. I mean, where do you stand on this one then? So do you think the program was different then in how it discussed politics?
I think
Yes, I think so. I don't know. I just think it was a very different environment when it sort of like started, and they had different perspectives. And it just, as it went on for a long time, then perhaps obviously new writers, that some political aspects became a bit more integral to some of the storylines of some of the villains, and some of the parallels with some of the villains' perspectives of where they're from, their motives. I don't know. I can't think of so much in the 60s, but I think you 3 are. I mean, I love Doctor Who, but I think you 3 know Doctor Who, especially Classic Who, a bit more than me. So, can you think of any 60s perspective episodes where early political aspects came along?
Yeah. Unfortunately, when I was getting ready for this program, Michael, I've listed about 20 to 30 stories just straight away.
Just like that. Okay.
Yeah. But this is where it's kind of, well, how far do you think it was a fair treatment? So just so everybody knows in the thread and who's watching the program, as we discuss this, I'm going to try and keep up with the lads in when they mention stories. You can see, for example, Paul Richards has mentioned the great photographs. This is from the Daleks rehearsal, again from the Daleks rehearsal, since we may be talking about the Daleks tonight. So you're going to get some beautiful photographs as well as the commentary that's going on in between. I thought that might be tasty. So, yeah, the early ones, I mean, gosh, I mean, come on, let's get tasty first of all. So as I go down the panel, there were some 60s ones that were political, either political in narrative or political in their messaging. We could decide where they were. Was there any story in the 1960s that you think went too far regarding its politics? Simon Lydiard, was there one where you thought a bit too laboured?
I'm not sure. I mean, in a sense, I would say there were some stories which didn't go far enough. And what I mean by that is when Doctor Who started, and I think Sylvester referenced it, it was meant to be a partly educational program.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So there were some stories that were meant to be exploring scientific issues in a science fiction setting. There were also obviously historicals, and I think it's in the historicals where I would say, this might sound critical. I'm not being critical because I really love them, but I would say a couple of stories. Crusaders. Let me just backtrack a little bit. It was intended to be partly an educational program for children.
Yeah.
So if you accept that, you have to think about, if you're going to present historical scenarios, how are you going to do that in a scenario which is appropriate for younger viewers? How are you going to get some of these stories across, some of the ideas across, so that children can enjoy the plot, but it not be too difficult for them. But yeah, I'm going to start with Crusaders, which is one of my favorites. It's an absolutely brilliant script by David Whittaker. Brilliant book as well, which I've read many times. Well produced, fantastic cast. So I love it. But what I'm going to say is, can you think it's appropriate to present the story about the Crusades and barely mention the brutality of it, the almost genocidal nature of it? That was not present. Now, in the context of when the story was made, I think that was probably the right idea. But it was a decision to make, and it was a political decision. Sometimes when you think about is something political, you have to think. I'm trying to remember when I studied English literature. It might have been Jacques Derrida who spoke about the text says what it does not say. Sometimes you have to look for the gaps in the text, and in Crusaders, the gap is there is limited moral consideration of what is happening. Now, don't mistake me, I absolutely love it. It's a fantastic story, and I'm happy to continue to watch what survives of it today. But some kind of editorial decision must have been made about how to present that. And I think that's the same with some other historical stories. Aztecs, maybe it's a little bit more of an issue.
This is where, I mean, if I just open it up for a second, because I mean, I understand what you're saying. As trends come and go, actually, and discussions about the past, we're having a lot of it now with the British Empire, so to speak. Things change in what's taught and everything. But on accuracy front, in a way, what we're saying is, as we're learning more now, we need to depict a more accurate, fair picture of what actually happened. And you've mentioned the violence and stuff to do with the Crusades. But then you think how Doctor Who and other programs reflect the past deliberately inaccurately. So, like blind casting, that sort of thing. I'm just fascinated by this concept that people want Doctor Who and other programs to be as accurate as possible on history, which is educate kids, but then again, we are deliberately misrepresenting the past visually or aesthetically. I'm just fascinated by how one thing has to be cast iron as good as possible, and the other one, no, we need to be as blind as possible. I'm just throwing that in there.
So are you saying that the real classic Who was very visually misinterpreting history compared to now? Because obviously now modern Who is very off with a lot of its visual aspects of history, I think. But are you saying even back in the 60s, some of the actual visual representation of history was completely off when it's supposed to be more of an educational show?
Well, you've got casting choices. We all talk about Bill Potts being in the Doctor Who in the Victorian period and all those depictions.
Oh, yeah.
There's just so many different ways. If you're going, I mean, Simon is correct. I agree with him. If you're going to educate the kids, it needs to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
But while you're doing that, you're also supposed to be telling a story, but then you also are deliberately, because of a policy from all these different media agencies, to deliberately misrepresent aesthetically what the past looked like.
Well, this is why the Sir Isaac Newton recently thing, where he was a person of colour in Doctor Who, and of course, from what I understand, Isaac Newton was a white person, and so even if I know it's not so much aimed at children these days, but that's completely wrong. Isn't that something? Why would you want to put things in a false perspective? Why not just give at least as close as possible to reality, but involve science fiction writing in historical context?
And I think this is why political, when Sylvester McCoy said it, is actually more pejorative than it needs to be, because I think actors nowadays, when they say something's very political, it's kind of it's sending a certain story message.
Sure.
I am concerned in one way, which is you really should, with an educational program, which is, as Simon said, this is what Doctor Who was set up for, partly, that you do depict history, which is complicated because there's sides, but you try and accurately depict it.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
As you accurately depict it, you are imposing an ideology from the media organization to say, but the past is going to be made to look different to as it was.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I think all writers work within the sort of culture of their time, don't they? Even going back to Shakespeare, because his history plays aren't very accurate, really. They are kind of pseudo propaganda mostly.
Yeah.
Particularly
this is it.
probably like Richard III. So you're writing within the culture and also who's going to pay you of the time. So just referring to Doctor Who, I think the sort of the history ones, if we're on the history ones, are within the kind of mainstream views of history of that period, broadly anyway. So the sort of Richard the Lydiard was generally seen as a kind of heroic king, as opposed to a murderer of many Arab people and sort of wrecking the Middle East a bit of his time.
Yeah.
But the consensus was around that. So I doubt it's something which challenged that.
I think you're right. I think that was the consensus, and I think some of the 60s historicals reflect that consensus. I think the sort of educational mission of Doctor Who is not now what it was in the 1960s. I think television is different anyway. I think if children want to learn history by watching television, they're probably going to more likely watch horrible histories than Doctor Who, which, by the way, is a lot nastier than Doctor Who. I think my point was that those historicals present, and they're sort of they're in the culture of their time, but they're a fairly conservative interpretation of history. And also another obvious sort of logical flaw in Doctor Who as it progressed is every time the Doctor landed on an alien planet, he was able to sort of change what might have been their history, to resolve the situation, to boot someone out of power, or to change the power status. He could have done the same many, many times on Earth. Why didn't he kill Hitler?
That's an argument that pops up in the Aztecs, doesn't it? About Barbara wants to change how the Aztecs, or your taxa, as we must call her.
That's right.
Temporarily, that there's a kind of argument between her and the Doctor about, this is the beginning of the end of the sun god, and then the Doctor says, no, you can't change anything.
It's interesting. Has Doctor Who ever actually, just going back to what Simon said, actually had a story where they've tried to change a historical person for good? I.e., like, obviously they have not killed Hitler, although there is an episode called "Let's Kill Hitler."
There is,
but I was just wondering whether you could think of any example where the Doctor has tried to change something which is from our real history into something potentially better.
Well, in a way, they touch on it. They've done it more under the since 2005 onwards. For example, well, actually, it was under Moffat. Vincent van Gogh. To give him some confidence that he's valued. The joke with Charles Dickens that you will be remembered, and Charles Dickens is shocked. There's little touches of it. Queen Victoria in Tooth and Claw, where basically "we are not amused" was the joke that she picks up. Apparently, So in a way, yes. I actually thought within the history of Doctor Who, though, a key figure would be Davros, and Davros was, in a way, the Doctor was trying to change him. When he goes back to be nice to him as a boy.
Yes, trying to make him better. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, trying to change his actual past to make him a better person in the future.
So that's my best example.
That's a good example. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, it's the best one.
But that was entirely within the fictional context of the series.
Yes.
I seem to remember a few times the third Doctor referred to historical figures. So there's one story, I can't remember which ones, where he talked about Napoleon Bonaparte, when he says, "Bony, I said, an army marches on its stomach."
Yes.
So there's a few occasions in Pertwee's era where he kind of quite light-heartedly injects some things which he's allegedly influenced people in the past. And I kind of forget in the modern era, and to be honest, I'd far rather talk about the classic series because I think it's more interesting. But in the modern era, we've got Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
So
And it's a dangerous one, isn't it? Because as you start to depict people, Michael Herbert picked on it, which is as soon as you are depicting people, and how they look, and you mentioned Richard III. You know, are we going for stereotype? Are we going for myth and legend? Are we going for truth?
Yeah.
And Shakespeare fell into myth and legend with certain ones. I was going to ask you a question before I forget it, because it's all about the political element in Doctor Who, but it's coming from a different way. Listen. If we're all going to judge Doctor Who, us and in the thread, can I be fair here? The Doctor is overall a white middle-class alien, if you can have that concept, who lands on a planet, and I think the concept now is called white savior, and goes around the world almost like a missionary, solving the global and universal issues, and then disappears again. Now, if we're anti-politics in Doctor Who, if we're anti lots of these things, surely we want to erase the Doctor's character, because he might be a pacifist sometimes, he might be very above the fray sometimes, but he's a bit of a Bob Geldof. He appears, he tries to solve an issue, he tries to stop starvation in Africa, and then disappears again. Isn't that called the white savior complex?
It's interesting because I once interviewed Philip Hinchcliffe, probably in the early 1980s, so sometime after he'd finished producing the program, and I asked him, if you were running the program now, who would you cast as the Doctor? What would the Doctor's character be? And not in as pejorative a form as you've just said it, Brendan, but he almost said that. He sort of said a kind of a Victorian explorer, a sort of Victorian gentleman.
Yeah.
And it's, as the series starts, the Doctor is, he appears to be, as you say, a middle-class Edwardian gentleman.
Yeah.
Now, you could criticize it from that perspective, but I wouldn't. I think one of the things you've got to think about with politics, we're talking about politics in Doctor Who. The fundamental thing for me about Doctor Who is, do you enjoy it or not? If it's well made, if it's well cast, if it's well written, if it's well plotted, if it's enjoyable, it doesn't really matter to most viewers if there is politics in it, preferably subtle, but fundamentally it has to be a piece of good, engaging entertainment. And I think the character of the Doctor is entertaining. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm responding correctly to your challenge, Brendan, but I'm in favour of the Doctor, basically.
Yeah, and I am as well. It's just that I was trying to be very fair to everybody in fandom who comes from different sides. I mean, they either like RTD's era on messaging. I'm not going there really today, but you know what I mean? They either like it or they don't. He seems to be promoting a more left view. If you're on the right, you're not going to like it. That's what I'm saying. But if you really look at the whole program concept, as you said, it's kind of built on a patrician, missionary zeal, so to speak.
Yeah, but it varies as well with each Doctor as well, because that is much less the case with Troughton's Doctor.
Yes.
He is much less of a dominant leading figure. He influences things, but they happen around him because he enables them. So his Doctor is probably the least patrician. Oddly, the most patrician, I think, in performance is John Pertwee, even though he's written as a very liberal, anti-establishment character. The way it's performed, and even in a sense written, he's a member of Gentlemen's Club. He knows senior people in the establishment. That's a very, very patrician interpretation.
But also he's quite anti-bureaucrats and politicians and generals and everybody else generally from the establishment. So he's both inside it and outside it at the same time, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wanting his cake and eating it. So
just going back to what Sylvester said, I think if you're talking about the 60s, then I think he wasn't watching, maybe he's confusing shows or whatever, but I think if you wanted much more overtly political drama, then you want to go to things like Armchair Theatre or the obvious one, the Wednesday play, where there were very political, with the work of Jim Allen, like Big Flame. John Hopkins' Fable, which looked at apartheid and treated it by having Britain, where the people in charge are black and the whites are the minority. And he used that sort of allegory to make people think about what it would be like to be a black person in South Africa. So there was far more overt politics, I would say, in other drama than Doctor Who.
Now, you see, we were saying before the program started tonight where we might go with this. Doctor Who overall, if you look at the 61 years, I know there's going to be a generalization here, but just for the sake of kind of, moving it on, has been cynical about religion. Although when Barry Letts was in charge, you had a Buddhist push. It felt like, Planet of the Spiders, various things like that, did that. But it tends to, I mean, how many times have we seen sacrifices and altars and, you always have science versus religion. Or you have Curse of Peladon. Everybody goes, Curse of Peladon, it's about the EEC. Forget that for a second. If you look at Curse of Peladon, you've got Hepesh and, the nonsense religion, the hocus pocus. And I don't know, sci-fi, I suppose you would expect science fiction will always make religion look stupid. I suppose you would. Look at Tom Baker's Face of Evil, when, of course, they were all worshipping, an image. So I don't know. Doctor Who always seems to have been cynical about religion. I'm sick of sacrifices from Stones of Blood onwards. I was watching Death of Daleks the other day. Here we go, another sacrifice and loads of men in hoods. The usual.
We do a whole show called Doc in the Hood, don't we? Because of all those sort of cults that pop up, like as you said, or in the one in Italy.
Well, the other one was that Doctor Who has quite all the way through been pretty much anti-capitalist, don't you think, in its messaging? Big companies go to Green Death boss, go further back, go enemy of the world, the Trumpian figure of Salamander. That kind of. I'm just putting it out there, and I'll shoot me down in a minute, thread and lads in the panel. So cynical about religion, I think Doctor Who's pretty consistent. Anti big company. And more statist overall. They were the ones, and definitely anti. And that's roughly.
I think that's regular in most science fiction. I think it's often anti-capitalist. It's quite often anti-religion. I mean, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, but I've seen a lot of science fiction, and a lot of these shows do have that parallel, especially long-term franchises. I don't know why it's like that. It's just, as you say, religion and science fiction doesn't normally mix that well. I think it can mix. I think it can actually have some interesting perspectives. I would love an episode of the Doctor where he actually encountered more of a sort of Christians, or sort of where, in a way where it's so important that he has to sort of interpret why it's so important to them, and whether he would actually be respectful or whether he would dismiss it. I mean, I don't think he's ever done that, really, has he?
The only I don't think so. The only I can think of a couple of stories when he's obviously you reference Buddhism in the Barry Letts era.
Yeah.
You also have Abominable Snowmen, but there's no commentary on religion.
Yeah.
In that, I can't really think of any story where the Doctor has met, people, obviously Christians, and had any form of discussion with them. I mean, what Doctor Who has never done, and I would never want it to do.
I know what you're going to say. Go and see Christ. Go down back in time.
Well, no, I don't want to. But I also don't want. I don't want Doctor Who as a program to attack Christianity.
Okay. Yeah.
I like the idea.
Keep it sort of neutral.
Yeah. I think I like the idea that the Doctor is very respectful of different belief systems and cultures. So
I agree.
I wouldn't want that to happen.
No.
But no, you had it on the nail before there, Michael.
Yeah, so Cliff Maxwell, I mean, gosh, it's like there's a thread going on and there's a commentary here, and we're going to get into some of the stories, because I know we're Doctor Who fans, and I know we're touching across the surface, just testing the waters, and then the lads on the panel and those in the thread, if you listed a story you'd like us to explore for a few minutes, within this debate, please give us an example. So Michael and Simon will do the same, including myself, so we can actually enjoy talking about that story as well. And it's an excuse to show some nice, rare photographs. So Cliff Maxwell, cynical about any cultural idiom that can get out of control and suppress liberty. It's a very libertarian show at its best. I mean, overall, Doctor Who, I think, as a program, has sold overall the right message. It's good versus evil. It tends to be. I think where fans, if they're politically aware, will always have a problem with a story where it looks as though it takes a side. Now, obviously, evil and good is easy, but it's defining what is good. And if evil is Trumpian, are we going into an area Doctor Who shouldn't? As an example.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Because we have a lot of Americans who are watching us that I can just see Divine and Dragon now, for example, who 50% ish of America Trump at the moment, 50% will be Kamala Harris. I mean, so Doctor Who, does it need to wade into the battlefield of baiting 50% of, say, American, pleasing 50%? Should Doctor Who be doing that?
I'd say that's not its role as a drama to be interventionist, is it? It might be reflecting issues around totalitarianism and liberty, which in which context I'd like to mention the macro terror, because you got there a sort of society which is basically being brainwashed, doesn't it? I mean, it's very much a satire based, I think, derived a lot from Orwell's 1984. So you've got a society where people are sort of forced to be happy.
Happiness Patrol.
Yeah, which is almost anticipating the Happiness Patrol, 30 years earlier. And so they're kind of constant songs and marching, and there's a kind of tannoy. And then you got Big Brother, or the controller, who they only ever see on video. So I think it's quite a clever satire. And beneath it, literally, is the macro terror. But you're told, no, they don't exist. If you exist, you're some sort of heretic and dissident. So in some sense, there's a lot of interesting ideas going on in that story around.
I don't know about you two. I like the idea of macro terror and the Happiness Patrol as ideas, because as a teacher myself, I like it when the kids, since it is about education, are critical thinkers, and those two stories have a cynicism there, healthy cynicism, to say, question the propaganda you're given, question what you're being told by politicians, and don't, that's when I think Doctor Who really works.
Watch out for the crowds. Yeah.
Sorry, to your question, you were kind of, I think you were trying to ask us about should Doctor Who intervene in American politics, and my answer is it should not explicitly do so. I don't want the program to be used in such a way that people are thinking it's telling them how to vote.
It had quite an anti-Trump character, didn't it, in Jodie Whittaker's era?
The Arachnids.
Yeah, well, if you interpret him as a form of Trump, and I think so. But I mean, I think the problem there is I don't want the program to kind of almost say vote Republican or vote Democrat or vote Labour.
Yeah, you don't want that. No,
it should definitely not go.
No, it shouldn't do that at all. No, it shouldn't do that
anywhere near that. And I think if it's too explicit, I mean, the Happiness Patrol was the reason Sylvester made his comment. I don't mind telling people, because it's easy for you to find out. I absolutely could not stand Margaret Thatcher, but I think it was. I think that program was too obvious and explicit and caricature.
Yeah, I agree. It was focusing on that issue, and it wasn't one of my favorite episodes. But it definitely was the message in that episode about it.
Yeah. And isn't this? I mean, since we do, I mean, God, this is such an interesting debate. We can go backwards and forwards. But since you've mentioned Happiness Patrol, both of you, and we're on it, fans will say that if you're talking about Doctor Who becoming too political, or is always political, the Andrew Cartmel era was deliberately political. I've got quotations from Andrew Cartmel saying when he got the job, he really wanted the government ousted. He actually was saying that. So you've got the ideology and the mission there from Andrew Cartmel, who's actually making sure, he's script editing all the stories and making sure he gets Ben Aranovich, great story, Remembrance, for example. Slightly less so with Battlefield, but you know, getting that type of writer in to have a certain type of message. So did the Happiness Patrol kind of depict what was going on at the not the BBC, but within the Doctor Who department, which is we're actually a very anti-government, and as you said, Simon, you would prefer Doctor Who not to pitch its tent too much in that way, in such an activist way.
It can explore issues. And I think it's fine to help people to think about issues, but it should not be. Yeah, it should. There's a limit to how far it should go in terms of pushing.
Yeah, there's a barrier to. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, even Malcolm Hulke didn't inject into his stories vote communist, did he?
No, of course not. No, because their primary aim was to make drama that works, and so if you start with agitprop or whatever, it's not going to work. The story's written, and I've been to enough left-wing big speaking as a socialist. I've been to enough bad socialist theatre as well as good. So you've got to initially write drama that works and raise issues, but not sort of ram it down people's throats because it turns people off, doesn't it?
Well, talking about turning people off and all the rest of it, since this is a Doctor Who passionate program, you know, fans, let's break the debate on that that kind of superficial level. Let's dip into it. So with each of you three and the thread, if you're going to argue for or against, or where it's gone too far, etc., on the political front, I know, Simon, you started with a couple of stories, but I know you've got loads listed. I'm going to ask you all for one reference point on when you think it did it well, did it badly, went too far, was a great political narrative for the kids, got it all wrong. So, you know, I mean, as you're all thinking, I'm going to kind of, I might as well just start it off, if you get my gist, to be fair to everyone. And please, in the thread, everyone, give us an example. Here's one that I saw people listing, you know, when I'm kind of keeping an eye on what people are saying about the program, etc. And they mentioned the Caves of Androzani. And on that one, you've got a brilliant quote from the Caves of Androzani, Robert Holmes: "A businessman's patriotism may differ from that of a politician." You know, it was a really cynical, gritty. I remember as a teenager absolutely adoring Caves of Androzani at so many different levels. I thought it was clever. I thought it was exciting. It was a regeneration story, but Perry was in trouble. And of course, you've got on the right-hand side there, you've got peace and war, big pharmaceuticals, radiation, loads of things, loads of big topics to get your teeth into. And of course, it was one of those interesting ones where the Doctor actually didn't seem to have any influence. He was kind of we were talking about white savior and, you know, this kind of the Doctor being very patrician, but actually in Caves of Androzani, the Doctor is kind of thrown about between Sharaz Jek fighting Morgus, and all the politics on Androzani as well, Androzani Major. So you've got, it's a brilliant story. It's very political. It's political on the person level. You've got jealousy and anger and revenge. You've got greed with the pharmaceuticals and greed with the drug runners, and the negotiations between Sharaz Jek and the drug runners. On so many levels, I think that story is very political. And I found it extremely entertaining, and I never thought I was being preached at. And every political story is, to some degree, giving you a message. Of course it is. Yeah. So if I went down the panel, that's just one example. I don't know what the thread think of that. But Michael Ball, if I asked you for a nice example, when I say a nice example, I'm just saying an example from you where Doctor Who was political, the political narrative was good or bad, didn't work, went too far, or you think pitched it well. What the reference?
The episode I'm thinking of is Inferno, the alternative universe, where obviously it depicts society in a politically negative regime, and obviously it's controlled by the authorities, a bit like a mirror universe from Star Trek. And I suppose really in that episode, it was just giving me a demonstration of just how bad things can be, and actually suggest that our universe isn't so bad. That's the episode that comes to my head. when you ask me that question.
Well, Matthew Burrows agrees with you. There you go. They're straight in there. Inferno got it right and shows how easy this world can slip into fascism, which is an interesting one to do. And if I just show you there as an example, if I just clear Matthew's comment, environmentalism, destruction of resources, ignoring scientific warnings for personal gain. Do you have good memories of that story, Michael?
Yeah, I do. I thought it was a very interesting episode because Doctor Who doesn't do many parallel universe episodes. It's normally just in the main universe. And of course, I was always fascinated with the era where the Third Doctor was trying to fix the TARDIS and it went wrong. And I just thought it was a very interesting concept. And it's always just good to see Earth in a slightly unfamiliar perspective. And I think that's why it sort of like stuck with me when I first watched it. So it's one of my favourite Third Doctor episodes. I just thought it was very clever.
Now, it doesn't spoil the other two lads here, but Sam and Lydiard, where do you stand on Inferno, on its messaging, since we're exploring that for a moment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I must admit, when I originally saw it, I kind of didn't really appreciate it. I was about 7 years old. It's a bit like
confusing for a 7-year-old, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit like Concorde. It went right over my head.
yeah.
The old ones.
That's a good one. That's the one.
Yeah, but no, I agree. I think it was really interesting, and the sort of dangerous slipping into fascism, I think, was very, very well presented. It's also, of course, one of those stories which the cast frequently mention as their favourites. I think John Pertwee did. I will tell you, by the way, that Nicholas Courtney either changed his mind or it was a political decision, because when I first met him in 1978, I asked him what his favourite story was, and it was he changed his mind. Originally, he thought it was Inferno, and later on, I think he changed it to the Demons.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I think it was a great story, really, really, really good, and actually, it wasn't subtle. But I don't think
it wasn't. It wasn't subtle.
No, but nobody minded, really. I don't think it offended anybody.
No,
and because it's a parallel universe.
That's why it's a parallel universe. It's different.
Yeah, I mean, it's very binary, and so therefore, yes, it was unsubtle in that way. But I think it's a good choice there. As I come to Michael Herbert, I just want to bring in Cliff Maxwell, who's throwing in Mind of Evil, throws international politics front and center, but brings the friction down to underlying feelings that we can confront and change within reason. It's the machine metaphor at fault. Michael Herbert, what are your thoughts on Inferno? Maybe Mind of Evil there?
Yeah, but I think they're both brilliant stories and raise a lot of interesting issues. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Inferno for a while, but the whole idea of the parallel universe, which again, it's not very much based on 1984, isn't it? I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah, there's a big parallel. Yeah, I get that.
There's even a picture of the leader on the wall somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
So, I thought it's a bit, I think, one episode too long.
I know. I look, I'm an honest Doctor Who fan. 7 episodes was always a bit of a push for me.
Yeah.
However, Michael Herbert, I'll come to you now for your choice.
Okay.
I don't know where you're going to go with this. I don't know if you're going to make a negative statement, a story that got it wrong, one that got it right, but it's up to you, of course. So Doctor Who has always been political, says Sylvester. What's your reference point within this debate for you?
Well, I wanted to pick a story which is probably lesser known because it's not survived, but The Savages by Ian Stewart Black.
Okay, yeah.
Where you've got the Doctor lands there, and apparently they know about him, they're expecting him. This appears to be a kind of wonderful civilization, enlightened. But then they discover it rests on draining the life from the so-called savages. And eventually the time travelers help the savages overthrow the elders. I mean, there's a debate between Jano, who says, "We do not understand you, Doctor, you who have accepted our honours gladly. How could you condemn this great artistic and scientific civilization because of a few wretched barbarians?" And the Doctor says, "I go to oppose you in the same way I oppose the Daleks or any other menace to common humanity." So taking a very sort of strong line there. And you could say it as a metaphor for the West exploiting Africa or India or other colonies, I think. So it's again an interesting story, which I think works well. It's just a shame we can't watch it.
Yeah, I mean, when you mention that, it makes me think of the Mutants. where there's a message about don't judge the book by its cover, so to speak, that sort of thing. I know a lot of people have mentioned Colony in Space in the thread on my Sensefear Facebook page as well. But just like we did with Michael Ball's choice at this point, Simon, Savages?
I think it's an absolutely brilliant story. I agree with what you said. I think it's an underappreciated story because we can't watch it. But reading the novelization and listening to the soundtrack, yes, I think it's excellent. And I also thought, I listened to it relatively recently. I also thought it sounded very modern. It doesn't feel really dated. Maybe it's because I'm not looking at it, but it just does not feel dated. It feels like a really tight, modern science fiction story.
It could have fitted into the Out of the Unknown kind of series, if you ever watched any of those.
Yeah.
It's kind of some sort of bleakness at the heart of it in some ways, but also hope. And also the way that people are labelled as primitives or savages quite easily by Western civilization.
Now, as I come to Michael Ball, I'm just reflecting the thread because I am trying to keep up with you folks. I am. Enemy of the World, says David Harding, is a strange story for me. I read the novelization. Yeah, I think we all read it first before we actually saw it being on TV, so to speak. A lot of love for Inferno, of course, has come through here. Paul Richards does mention the Web Planet. There's a lot of political messaging in the Web Planet. It's just a shame about the dodgy effects distracts us. I said, let's have a look at a few others. I'm being fair to everybody. AFJ Kerno, I loved Inferno. Such an intense experience, and seeing the alternative UK was as scary as the upcoming disaster. And more love for the Web Planet. I didn't think we'd be talking about the Web Planet tonight, but there you go. It comes through.
Great story. Story.
AFJ, we might mention the Peladon 2 a bit later on, don't you, Rory? I'm sure we can't get through the night without that if we're going to do that. Let me just check a few more. SG, I still get chills watching episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Enemy of the World after only being able to watch. I know it is one of those where, if you talk about the history of Doctor Who, your reappraisal of Enemy of the World is one of the bigger ones. Web of Fear, just a bit less than the book, if you get my gist, because you had to live up to that. Tomb of the Cybermen had to live up to a lot, but Enemy of the World just got you thought, wow, this is brilliant. And of course, Troughton playing 2 roles. So Michael Ball, I haven't listened to the Savages for ages.
I saw the Savages ages ago, and it was one of those ones where it was like it was the audio, which obviously just survived, and there was still slight clips for it. I don't actually remember it that well, quite frankly. So I'm not the best person to ask on this one. I can't actually record it that well.
Michael, I'll tell you the truth. And look, there's me. I now do a stream as if that means I'm an expert. I'm not. I'm a Doctor Who fan. That's it. But basically, I always blur in my head the Smugglers and the Savages.
Yeah, it's not stuck in my head, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. I hope that it'll actually be eventually discovered and I can watch it properly in its glory. But it's not stuck in my head, unfortunately.
So, Simon, your choice as a case study for our discussion.
Yeah, mine is probably a bit of an obvious choice, but I absolutely adore it, and it is the Silurians, because I love the idea, and it's come up in our discussion before, that you've got these 2 apparently competing races, both with they would claim an equal claim on the planet, and you need to find some way forward, and you've got the military taking a particular decision, basically blow them up, which disgusts the Doctor, but the Doctor had tried on through the story to try and reassure the Silurians and negotiate for them. He does the same in Sea Devils, of course. It's pretty much the same story, but wetter. I love the idea that the Doctor is trying to find an agreeable solution to apparently unreconcilable positions, and that I think is a sort of a message for almost any time. I don't want to do it, but you could think of modern day situations where wouldn't it be wonderful if we could negotiate some way forward and not have to have the killing. So that was kind of a message for any time.
So the Doctor was more like an ambassador, wasn't he, in that sort of role? He was kind of in a situation where obviously the Silurians and the Sea Devils are both from Earth, and obviously that's what made them very interesting, because of course, you know, they've got as much entitlement to Earth as humanity has. So it's an interesting aspect with that particular story.
Is this, and obviously I'm going to come to Michael Herbert, everybody. I know in the thread, I know he's the Malcolm Hulke biographer, so of course I'm going to come to him.
I'm going to get a t-shirt with that.
So don't worry. So, you know, why have I got him on? Of course. But I just want to bring some of these in first. So Farsight, the Silurians, indigenous race supplanted by another. The Silurians and humanity treating each other as inferior nuclear energy. We've got Sadako 24. The Silurians is a good left-wing story. Warriors of the Deep is loony left. AFJ... Malcolm Hulke was a fascinating writer. I loved his novel. Well, yes, and we may mention that in a moment, of course, since we're talking about this. Richard Brown, proper Silurians and the Silurians. I hate the modern ones. Yes, sorry about that picture there, but
most people do hate the modern ones.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not very popular.
Call that picture just clickbait. Just call it that. So as I come to Michael, obviously on one of your specialist subjects, Malcolm Hulke.
Where's my comfy chair?
Could we say though, Michael, that I was hearing what Simon was saying, that and then when Michael added the ambassadorial bit role of Doctor Who here. Actually, is this where we really... I love the stories, by the way. I love the Silurians and I love the book. And I know what the Doctor's trying to do. But is this the Doctor actually getting too involved in... It's all worthy, but you've got two tribes basically on Earth, and he's trying to negotiate between them. And yes, he doesn't want one side to face genocide or anything, of course not. But whereas Genesis to the Daleks, he's got two wires, and have I got the right? And I can cope with that. Sometimes I think, is it getting too involved? Is the Doctor getting bogged down in tribal politics by actually saying, I'm going to negotiate between these two parties? I don't know, Michael. I'm just trying to be a bit kind of challenging.
Yeah, I think it's this is the first time. I mean, if you go back to the Faceless ones, and then Malcolm in that tries to, you know, writes the Doctor as somebody who's trying to create peace between two opposing sides. So at the end of the Faceless ones, the aliens, the chameleons, aren't destroyed. They're kind of, he's going to even help them to try and sort of resolve some of their problems, even though they've kidnapped 50,000 young people. And with going to the Silurians, yeah, he's very much trying to bring peace, isn't he? To kind of use sand, if you're if you're as old as I am, the United Nations Secretary General, to try and sort of bring kind of peace between the opposing sides, and also, but also there's the subtleties within it. So on his side, you know, the Doctor from the start is very critical, keeps making kind of remarks to Liz Shaw about, so that's typical of the military, give them a problem and they want to shoot at it. So he's sort of winding up the Brigadier quite a lot, and also on the other side, the Silurians. You know, you got the Elder who wants to try and do a peace deal.
Yeah.
And then you got the kind of angry young Silurian who wants to kind of destroy the apes and kill them off. So there are again subtleties within that. So.
There is a trope that we see in Doctor Who, maybe sci-fi, maybe drama, where I'm thinking, as soon as you said that about the older generation and the younger generation battling each other over what should happen, I'm thinking of the Leisure Hive and Pangle, and I'm you know, that's depicted quite a lot as well. But you know, a lot of people have a love for Malcolm Hulke stories, and I'm one of them. Obviously, you are, but. When I raised the question about tribal politics and the Doctor maybe going too political, getting too involved, like he is a humanitarian UN ambassador or something, whereas it's safer, isn't it, Doctor Who, when he's just defending them from an invasion, or he's solving a space plague. But when he suddenly starts getting involved in actual politics, Silurian politics, human politics, although it's a brilliant story, and I really appreciate what Malcolm Hulke was trying to do, is this dangerous, Michael Herbert? Is this a dangerous area where, when it's right, it's brilliant? But if RTD tried to do that now, which he's allowed to, where he shows two sides and the Doctor gets really involved in the politics of it, a lot of us might actually shout about that now. Is it a dangerous one to have the Doctor too involved?
I don't think, for me, no. But then I'd be sort of, I'm so ancient that I watched some of these the first time round. It doesn't bother me, the Doctor sort of trying to resolve issues. I think... I suppose what I didn't like in the modern era was the Doctor increasingly being seen as some sort of messiah.
Yes.
In the kind
of Space Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. The sort of the whole sort of the whole world's got to chant the name of the Doctor and etc. etc. Really didn't do a great deal more for me. So I mean, if you go right back to the start, the Doctor is quite often sort of sidelined or. The Patrick era is often just like nobody's taking much notice of him until eventually they all realise actually what he's saying is right. But usually it starts off with him being ignored or dismissed or disparaged, and they're going, "Oh, lock him up or get rid of him or go away, you annoying young man, little man." So the characterisation has very much changed in the modern era, and it doesn't grab me a great deal when he's like all powerful, all knowing, and we can all resolve it in the last 5 minutes by all sorts of wizardry and so on. So there's no drama.
I mean, the Sonic is like a magic wand. He just waves it, and it's solved.
He's a magician in the Tempest or something like that.
Yeah. Can I ask you about this Silurian story, which is very popular in the thread? So let's just talk about it for a moment longer. The resolution in the Silurians. Now let's go back to what Simon reminded us of. Doctor Who came about to educate the kids. And when you see the end of Silurians, is this a good dramatic point for the kids that things don't always get resolved how you want, that there's only one winner, that sort of things? Because it's an interesting resolution. They tried it again with Warriors of the Deep, didn't they? But with less effect. There's that element, and I want to throw in, there's two things now on about the Silurians, and we can really chew on this. The other one is, and I'm sorry to bring it up to present day, but the Silurians have become more humanoid, and it's been mentioned in the thread already. Now, if we're going to be political, and we're going to try and, like Simon said ages ago now, about being accurate in representation about history and everything, since the Silurians could be a metaphor, is this a kind of cultural appropriation, or is this a kind of dominance or colonialization of the Silurians by humans? Because even in the program, we're making them look more human. Why can't we make them look alien? And then you've got a good story about how we should treat each other.
I think you're becoming too political there, Brendan.
Now, I actually find it very interesting that suggests that the actual physical look of the Silurians will be interpreted differently. They look like lizard people in the classic, and that they look more like Jem'Hadar from Star Trek in current version. And it's kind of like you're going to talk to them and interact with them in a different way. They are humanoid in New Who, but in the old series they looked a whole completely different, and therefore they could be perceived differently in the way that they are featured in the stories.
Maybe they're all non-binary now. Who knows?
So what do you reckon? Was that a good resolution, the Silurians, for kids to actually say there's only one winner? It doesn't necessarily always turn out.
I think also two things. One is, yes, it's quite a shock, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, but then it's glossed over. So it's not like the Doctor says to the Brigadier, "I can't possibly work with you ever again." It could just blown up on a whole race here. I think it's mentioned in the next episode, and then that's glossed over and never mentioned again. So, I think it's unusual, isn't it, as a sense of the Doctors, and also in the Sea Devils, I think it's the Doctor who blows up the Silurians. He destroys the underwater base, doesn't he? Because he says otherwise, we could have ended up with a sort of destruction of everybody. So it's the least worst option.
Can I just ask you all, while we're hitting poetry at the moment, and actually, when I read a lot about the politics in Doctor Who and when people are happy or not as they watch it, yeah, given we've got the Green Death, the Curse of Peldon's always used boringly. If J. Kerno says here, that military aspect is what gives Poetry's Ear its distinctive edge. But I will say to AFJ and the panel, but it's also the one that seems to get people a bit more kind of baited, which is the Pertwee, the Third Doctor era, when he was exiled on Earth and he was in with the military. We've kind of referenced this already. He's in with the military, he's in with the establishment. He's therefore much more bogged down on human politics.
More integral to the actual whole series, because he's not just escaping next week and going off to wherever. He's got to be affiliated with UNIT, and he's part of it. He's part of the Earth system, so he has to fit in to how things work with UNIT, because he can't just fly away at the end of an episode. He's stuck.
Is he facilitating the military, though? I know he challenges them and tells them off, but he still works for them. So in the end, he is supporting them tacitly.
Yeah, he is supporting them.
Sorry, in part it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that the context of when the series was being made. Even by the 1970s, most of the people working on the program, men anyway, had done their national service.
Yeah.
And season 7, again, I've said this on a previous podcast, season 7 is kind of Quatermass. And Quatermass had the military component in it as well. Season 7 started as kind of almost like a Quatermass, John Wyndham type of science fiction, very, very British science fiction, which the military features in. I'm thinking about, there's a little bit of a military component in Village of the Damned, but I'm thinking more about the sequel film, Children of the Damned, not written by John Wyndham or based on a John Wyndham novel, but there's a very heavy military component in that. Just seems British science fiction in the 50s, 60s and later periods, just drifting into the 70s, had a strong military component, partly because of people's experiences, not just in the Second World War, but of national service as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I get that.
Quite a strong military aspect in A for Andromeda, if you watch the bits that survived, anyway. Because of sort of the computer eventually is taken over by the military, and they use it to build rockets that can shoot down other rockets.
Can I throw in? This is when I think politics is interesting in Doctor Who, because it can we win? So basically, I'm going to throw in Colony in Space, and then I'm going to mention Ark in Space. In Colony in Space, the Doctor gets involved plot-wise, and I'll show it now with some of these rare photographs I've got for rehearsals and stuff. But 1 minute the Doctor is tacitly just involved in the little politics on that planet where they are colonists. His issue is it's the big company again, isn't it? That's his issue. But in Ark in Space, he does that great speech when he says how he so applauds the human race in their indomitability, in how the fact that they kind of are basically colonizing the universe. So basically, politically, you've got the Doctor saying, I approve of colonization.
That slightly goes back to what I was saying about that discussion I had with Philip Hinchcliffe. Yeah. I think he had a degree of that concept. That speech in Ark in Space, I love it. It's a fantastic speech. It's almost Shakespearean because it's almost Hamlet's opening soliloquy. I can't even remember it, but how noble, how something is a man, how noble in aspect, how like a god. It has that sort of same sense, that same kind of highfalutin sense of speech. I think it's wonderful. But yeah, I mean, one thing we should say about Doctor Who and politics is it hasn't had a consistency. You may think someone earlier, I think on the thread, said it's always been libertarian. I think that's fair. I think the Doctor has usually anyway taken a libertarian perspective, and I don't mean, I'm not saying left wing or right wing, because you can you could be a left libertarian as well as a right libertarian, but I think he pretty much always has been a libertarian. But yeah, you cannot say Doctor Who has a politics that has always been consistent all the way through from 1963 to today. It may sometimes lean in particular directions, and I think generally it has been progressive, but I'm not suggesting it has been, a heavy left-wing message, but it generally has a sense of things getting better and you can do things better and things can be better. So I mean progressive in that sense.
I mean, look at sorry.
The mainstream of kind of British liberal thought, in the sense of liberal not being pejorative, not in America, but that's sort of, that we're against sort of racism, we're against sort of violence against women, and we're in favour of education for most people, things like that. So it's a kind of mainstream sort of evolution of social policy since the war, really, I think.
And Doctor Who was on, from 1945 to 1979, there was largely a political consensus in the United Kingdom anyway, around social policy. So, yeah, you're right. That was kind of mainstream liberal, but mainstream consensus thought in the UK.
Now, dead man, listening to our argument, not libertarian, liberal in the proper sense. Libertarians are too rational to have the compassion the Doctor has shown. Got there. Can I just say, where was I going to go with this? It'll come back to me.
You tell
us. Yeah, my old head. It's a classic, isn't it? Oh no, that was it. Right. Okay. Let's just say Doctor Who can do good political narratives, can have a political message, and it's entertaining, and every side feels as though they've had their moment in the sun. Which Malcolm Hulke did to a degree in his books very well. Right. Just take that as a given. Do you therefore, we're saying, the fad at the moment is this, the political ideology is settled on this, the 60s Doctor Who reflected its time and therefore that's okay. Would you go down the path that when we're on BBC iPlayer, certain things are seen as offensive, so therefore they're open to censorship in a 2024 kind of mindset, or they're open to, a warning before the program? This is the thing. Once Doctor Who goes and does do politics, because it's reflecting whatever's going on in society, it's open to later on censorship, scenes cut, or a kind of warning about it as if it's dangerous. I'm thinking of Talons of Wen Chian for a certain reason, for example.
Not
so much the messaging, but that's what worries me about Doctor Who sometimes, especially in the present era. And I know we're going to be mostly classic, but, in a few years, depending on how things fall on lots of issues, will Doctor Who be censored or clipped or be seen as dangerous to parents or something? And I don't want Doctor Who ever to go that far as a problem.
I would assume that you would get a warning. You would get some message saying that some of the aspects of this episode depicted are from a different time or something, and maybe upsetting to certain viewers. I would hope that they won't start actually editing certain small scenes which might be considered unsavory to a modern audience. I don't know. It's a very strange time here. One thing, this is why I'm not a big fan of streaming things, because things can be changed. Whereas if you get physical media, it's yours. You can keep it. It can't be edited. But it is what I don't know, to answer your question, but I don't like the idea of it being edited down.
It worries me because we started tonight. One of the early ones you mentioned, Simon, was the Crusades. And of course, you said it's of its time and all the rest of it. And you said, obviously, it doesn't depict certain things that it would do if it was made now. But then the next jump logically then is people somewhere on BBC iPlayer might say, well, hold on.
Actually, somebody just said Hugh Edwards has just been edited from a New Who episode.
Yes.
East Rhoda. And that's a recent thing. Yeah. And that's kind of like, so it's already happening. So, and this is New Who, so God knows what's going to happen to Classic Who.
In the Crusades, there were several actors who were kind of basically made to look like Arabs, weren't they? Including the actor who played Saladin. I think I've forgotten his name now.
I think, yes, there are going to be things. Crusade, you mentioned Talons of Wen Chiang, both of which I think are absolutely brilliant. I think are superb.
Yeah.
Particularly Talons of Wen Chiang, I think it's amazing. Piece of work, and I enjoy it and I love watching it. They're of their time. I think you have to see them in context. I definitely wouldn't favour editing them or cutting them.
No.
I think they should be presented as they are. I think if they're going to be on a platform where you kind of dip in, there isn't anything wrong in saying, this was, made at a time when attitudes were different. That's fine.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. Yeah.
Although I think I actually think with Talons of Wenjiang, that criticism is a misinterpretation largely, because I think Robert Holmes was trying to write a pastiche of what Doctor Who would be like as a Strand magazine story. So I think very deliberate.
So like Sexton Blake, isn't it?
Yeah, there are issues with casting. I agree. You wouldn't want to cast someone to play a Chinese character now who wasn't. You wouldn't cast a person who wasn't of the appropriate race. I agree, but think about books. I mean, we've already mentioned a couple of times Shakespeare. And people are going to say, well, you always read Shakespeare, you just read the words. You don't. I've studied Shakespeare. I've got a BA and a master's in literature, and you read into the text, you read the context, you understand it. But the text is preserved as was, and that's what I want with Doctor Who. Of course, Shakespeare did go through a period in Victorian era when it was so-called balderdized. That's where the word comes from. It was edited for children. But no, I absolutely don't agree with cutting or editing. I think,
and given happy endings, I think, like in King Lear.
Yeah, the king is happy, and has perfect eyesight, and never got on the drowned heath. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and Triple Jazz Musical all the way in Tasmania there. My God, the hour thank you for watching us. What this ungodly hour for you. I'll reward you. You mentioned the Sunmakers and wondered whether we were going to mention the Sunmakers. So here's your reward. The Sunmakers. There's a quotation. These taxes, they are like sacrifices to tribal gods. Now, I mean, cheeky Robert Holmes here. Yes, he'd had his, I think he'd had his tax return sent to him or something, didn't he?
He had, yes.
And is this cheeky political satire that goes on here? And of course, by the way, before anyone speaks, here's some and more rare photographs from the filming of Sunmakers. So please enjoy as we talk. So yeah, the Sunmakers, is that safe Doctor Who political satire?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. He was having fun, but it was fun. I mean, there were political messages in it, but it was incredibly well written and very, very amusing, very entertaining. I did think I can't remember the name of the actor cast to play the Gatherer Haid, but I thought he looked a little bit like Dennis Healy, who was the previous Becca in the United Kingdom.
But so I know what you're saying. It's a bit like Helen A, Sheila Hancock going with Thatcher. It's close. It's sailing close, but it's safe.
It was good. It was such a good story.
I mean, the set did look like Chock-a-Block, if you remember that.
Chock-a-Block, yes.
But this is when, I have to say, low budget. I mean, I can see where the set, I can see where I mean, if I go bigger, to be fair to everybody, these rare photographs, you'll see it's just a black set with some props.
Yeah, it's a bit bizarre, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but and to me, it does look like Chock-a-Block. If everybody remembers Chock-a-Block.
I've got that song in my head now, thank you, Brendan.
Sorry about that, Chock-a-Block. Yeah. With that little car she had, that little buggy. Hello, everybody. And of course, what was that called again? It wasn't a gas
steamer, wasn't it?
It was
Steamer, yes.
Steamer. I know. I was going too political then with them. Yeah. So anyway, Sunmakers, so Triple Jazz, why did you pick the Sunmakers? Why were you talking about the Sunmakers? Because obviously there it is. I mean, we think it's cheeky. We think that's fine. As a kid, I didn't see it was about tax, of course. I didn't. I just enjoyed the whole story. Mind you, we did see we saw a revolution where people threw a politician off a building.
Yes.
For policy, he was just enacting policy. I mean, gosh, we wouldn't go there. That's not a good educational
No,
lesson, is it?
that's not educated now.
I thought he was a senior civil servant, which is what I became. So I was terrified by that.
Well, yeah, you started the program scared of Daleks coming from the
Like
river. You should be,
Hungary in 1956, when they sort of
yeah, tell us your address. And we'll so
Yeah.
so the Sunmakers, I think, was a good fun one. This
It
is
was,
when Robert Holmes was
just
good.
come back to me. There was a revolution in the Space Museum, wasn't there? Organised by Vicky.
Oh yes,
She kind of sort of corrals the fairly adept young Xerons who just seem to be spent their time sitting around in black polo net sweaters moaning, and she gets them to actually sort of overthrow the. I keep wanting to call them the Morlocks, but they're called the Morocks, aren't they? The Morlocks.
yes.
So homegrown.
They're revolutionary beatniks, were they?
Yes.
Now, I'll jump to let's have a look. Let me jump to a different one. We've just looked at a Tom Baker, so let me be fair here and actually be fair to Sylvester McCoy, because he was referencing, I think, mostly the 60s. So let me jump to one that we haven't mentioned. Well, we've referenced it, but we haven't talked about. And if I said to Simon, Galaxy 4.
Yeah, Galaxy 4, not one of my favorite stories, to be honest. I think it's pretty boring, but it did have a political message in it, which is about well, I think it was about racism, because there was this issue about, you know, these people who, whatever they were called, I can't remember, were meant to be so ugly that you'd be frightened of them. And I thought that was a pretty simple, you know, not deep political story, but just a pretty simple story about message about dislike of the unlike.
Yes. Michael, are you aware of this one? Michael Herbert? Well, I say aware. Of course, you're aware of it, but I mean, cognizant of it recently.
Yeah, I think watched it a couple of times when I probably saw it when it was first on, because I'm so old, but I couldn't remember anything about it. But I've watched it a couple of times on the recreation. Yeah, it kind of feels like something, you know, the idea of sort of an all-female aliens who are like, well, they're not all aliens, are they? I mean, some of them subservient to I can't remember the chief woman in charge, but the others are like sort of clones or androids, aren't they? So it's partly about these oppressed minority of women in some sense.
Yeah, when Simon referenced this, I mean, he sent me a text earlier, obviously, with a list. And when Simon did, I thought, oh, is he going to mention the fact that the female cast? Because you can go political in so many different ways.
I'm gender blind.
Yes, we need to be tonight. We've got no woman panelists tonight.
Right, that was pointed out before we started.
Yes, there's no tick boxing tonight, folks.
It's partly about also fear of the other, which is a common theme in lots of Doctor Who, isn't it? That these women whose name, I can't remember the name of the race they come from now, but they fear the aliens, which is very bit like the ambassadors of death, isn't it? Carrington's got a fear of the aliens and wants to alert the world, and they've got what we would regard as an irrational fear of the other aliens who could have helped them if they'd been nice to them.
Well, Michael,
feel a bit sorry for them when they were left behind as the planet disintegrated.
Yeah, well, Michael Herbert, I'm aware we're going to lose you. So, can I just say, obviously, I'll be happy to have you on again. We'll do more Malcolm Hulke. Yes, and we're trying to meet up, aren't we? After I get married, you know, we're trying to do something. I don't know how possible it is, but thank you for coming on tonight and giving us your expertise. And see you soon. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks to everybody who's taken part. It's been really interesting. And we can obviously go on till midnight. Remember that Channel 4 program used to start at midnight?
Yes, After Dark.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
with a lot of drinking as well.
Oliver Reed is in it.
Ollie Reed. Oh,
yeah, we've all seen that episode, haven't we? Oh my god!
We should do a Sensphere After Dark, where we just.
That could be an interesting one, couldn't it? Yeah.
We could just start at midnight with drinks, and then until we all fall asleep.
Not on a Sunday night, though. It'd have to be a Friday night, I think.
Well, Divine and Dragon, I can kill two birds with one stone here. So Divine and Dragon, who I obviously haven't got to write to yet, but thank you. I'll catch up with you because I know you're teaching, and of course, it was a thank you to Michael for being here tonight. So, Let's try Simon again. So another case study, another reference one where you think, gosh, this is when it worked, didn't work. Politics in Doctor Who, political narrative. You give me a list. I'm ready.
I think I've probably done my list.
Well, you mentioned, for example, I've got Galaxy 4, Dalek Invasion of Earth, the Daleks, the Aztecs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've sort of talked about the Aztecs really, and it was the same point partly the same point I made about the Crusade, which is the presentation of the history is quite conservative, and it also raises that logical dilemma that the Doctor can solve almost anything. I mean, if the Daleks invade the Earth, isn't that our history? He can change that, but he can't do it with the Aztecs. He can't do it with the Crusade, the French Revolution, and so forth. So I think my point is it points to partly an inconsistency in the series, which I think is why the historicals largely why they went, because it was difficult to keep on putting the Doctor into these historical situations and saying he can't resolve them. I know he had a logical reason for not resolving them, but that logic doesn't sit alongside the logic which is applied in these science fiction stories. So yeah, I think as I said, it's partly a logical issue, which meant the historicals had to end, and partly the fact that it's a fairly conservative presentation of history. Having said that, I said about the Crusade, I love it and I wouldn't criticize it, but you could say it didn't really show the horrors and the sort of nastiness of what the Crusaders were doing. I don't think I could make any case for having a positive interpretation of human sacrifice. So I think aspects of the Aztec civilization, I'm just not going to say, oh, it should have been a bit more both sides and fairer on that.
So as I come to you, Michael, I'll just throw in a few more, of the thread, because they're enjoying this. I tell you, OK Man Gaming, the difference between old and new is that any political message was subtle and part of the story. New Doctor Who is just in your face and is the story and not just part of it. So thank you for that. David Hardin, maybe my memory's faulty, but I can't remember the classic series tackling a political topic and bombing badly with it. They always seem to make it work. And this is where, and somebody who wrote to me today when I saw my thumbnail said, is the issue with Doctor Who being political, is it when it's leftist that people have a problem, or when it's on the right that they have a problem? And that is a point. Is that one of the issues there, that when it leans too far to one side, does it then...
Probably either side, wouldn't it? I mean, if it's very outright, I mean, that's the fair, because obviously people are either left or right. I know people are in the middle as well, but if it goes too much to one direction or the other, then someone's not going to like it, and they're going to say that this has gone too far. That's just a natural realization of what they're doing.
Can I just raise a point with both of you in the thread then, folks? Because we've mentioned the Crusades, the Aztecs, we could have Marco Polo. Gosh, can you imagine Marco Polo now? It'd be made very differently.
Oh, God.
Even though we'd love to see it. The truth is, would you really like Doctor Who to nowadays, say 2025, do a proper, as Simon you want, accurate depiction of history? Because I think of the Demons of the Punjab, and when
I was thinking some of the modern stuff,
and I'm just wondering whether I really want Doctor Who to get that bogged down, because even Rosa is the one I was going to talk about. Rosa depicted a version of it, and just like Sadako 24 says, the Aztecs is so ancient history that you can do what you want with it, really, I suppose, and it won't trigger people. But you do civil rights movement, and you do issues, trans rights might be another one. I'm just throwing them in there, where people might get baited or triggered, and you're thinking, this is supposed to be a program. I don't know. But would you do a historical now, knowing that, I think I agree with Simon that it should be depicted actively, but then
I agree, yeah.
Are you going to bog it down? And I don't want Doctor Who doing that.
I think, Chibnall did start experimenting with historicals, as you said. He did Rosa, Demons of the Punjab. I think Rosa, I mean, I kind of liked it, but I think it was a bit clumsy. I think injecting the science fiction element into it made it quite clumsy. I would hope, I know we're saying we don't want to offend people, but I would hope there was nobody these days, or very few people, who would want to roll back civil rights. I mean, if you do, I think they're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Demons of the Punjab, I absolutely loved. I really enjoyed it. It did depict historical issues, but they were told through characters.
But it goes back to old Who. It's educational. It was like
it
reminds me of real old classic Who, where it was not necessarily always done brilliantly, but it was educational for younger people about obviously these two elements in history.
I think it was, but I think historicals now are. I mean, they were as I said, they were problematic in the classic series in the 1960s. After Highlanders, did we have any more real historicals? Don't think so.
We had Witchfinders as well
in the classic.
Chibnall.
Yeah. I mean,
Russ T Davies too, doing a historical episode.
You had
no. Please don't.
Well, he did. He did. We weren't going to do. We were going to try not to do RTD.
Sorry. I apologize.
Let me just say. I think a lot of people have already commented very, very negatively about Rogue. My criticism is nothing to do with anything anyone else said. My criticism, which I think is most offensive of the program, is it was set in Bath, where I used to live, and it was filmed in Wales.
Oh, okay. That's it. That's a very
beautiful city of Bath, and they didn't film any of it there.
Ah.
Well, there you go, and that's a political point he's making there. David Harding, the problem I have with Rosa and the Demons of the Punjab is there are things in those stories that don't really need to be there. If you can shout out what those are, if so we can actually understand. If the historicals in season 11 were an interesting experiment, and Demons of the Punjab was excellent, as Simon has just been saying. It didn't appeal to me, as in I found it a bit dull. That's all I'll say. And I found that with some of the 60s historicals, it's just a bit dull.
It's not quite, not quite
and
right.
this is when we're judging Doctor Who being political, you've got some Hartnell stories that we've mentioned where there's some politics. The Troughton ones almost escape it. There's the War Games, there's the Dominators, the Enemy of the World. But basically, it was the monster seasons, wasn't it? I mean, we really went bug-eyed monster with Troughton. Then we had heavy politics with Pertwee. Tom Baker, Deadly Assassin, a political narrative, a cynicism about corruption and stuff.
I want to talk about this one aspect of this second. We've gone through the actual list, but there's one thing we haven't talked about yet, which I'd like to bounce off you two. But what about Peter Davison? What did he do?
Well, people have mentioned Warriors of the Deep, which I think generally people are saying was a bit clumsy. I think someone said it was loony left. I thought it was interesting, but I think it was also a bit bleak.
Yeah.
Another person mentioned Kinder. Despite having 2 degrees in English literature, that's still far too complicated.
What about Warriors Gate? That got me.
Oh, God.
I love that.
I love that episode. I thought Warriors Gate was really good.
One of the reasons I love Warriors Gate is nothing to do with politics. It's because it was made in the 1980s and it used the electronic studio. There was because obviously now Doctor Who is made digitally. It looks like film, but there was a lot of experimentation in the late 70s, early 80s, in the BBC in particular, with how you use the electronic studio to best effect. And I thought Warriors Gate really did that very, very well.
Oh, that's interesting.
David Harding's answered my question, as you were saying. The white racist from the future trying to prevent Rosa Parks from riding the bus is only in it to give the Doctor something to do.
Yeah.
This is the problem, I think, with some of the modern historicals, that actually, while you're trying to do I agree with Simon, trying to do an accurate depiction, why do we need the Doctor? And actually, again, a white female Doctor basically advising or suggesting or nudging Rosa Parks, a black lady, Really? Are we going
Yeah.
there? I think it's just too. I actually think the way everybody's quite sensitive on some of these topics now, maybe it's dangerous for Doctor Who to go that close to current. I mean, current is the last 50 years or so.
Well, yeah, I mean, thinking about another story, which is a kind of a pseudo-historical, Time Warrior.
Yeah.
A Robert Holmes story, Third Doctor story. You know, it's basically just an. I mean, someone correct me because I'm going to be wrong, but it just seems to me like a great adventure story. The characters in it aren't real. They're not exploring real. Well, there are a little bit of background politics about the king and the barons at the time, but it's in the background. It's just a great adventure story in a historical setting, but of course with a huge science fiction element in it. So you know, it can be done well. I agree with Rosa, although I enjoy it. I think did it not win an award? I think it might have done, but I think yes, it was a bit clumsy. It's possible to do, but you've got to have a really, really good plot.
Real solid story to make it work as well.
You have, yeah.
Which is not always done these days.
Yep. And as Deadman says, oh, it's worse than that. I met Rosa Parks. She was extremely intelligent and capable. To say that she needed saving, even if in a fictional context, is insulting.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Yeah,
and that's when it's dangerous. You know, you think, oh, can we please go to the planet Zog? You know, the planet that RTD doesn't want to take us to. Just take us there for a minute, please.
I'd like us to do. I mean, I would personally like us to do more real science fiction stories. And also, I'm a big fan of the Hinchcliffe era, so science fiction horror.
Yes. So when you say real science fiction, I get the Hinchcliffe bit. Are you saying a kind of Christopher H. Bidmead style sci-fi?
Yes, I am. Although Logopolis bored me rigid. But yeah, I think it's got to be very, very good plotting, very well written. But yeah, science fiction. Harder science fiction. I don't mind fantasy elements in it, but I would rather it had a bit more science fiction than it does now.
Yeah, but it's fluctuated. I mean, back in the end of the 80s era, it got a bit more sort of fantasy, I think, in some episodes. And now this era is getting more fantasy again, which seems like it's a parallel, doesn't it? So it's quite interesting.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I don't know if it played to the sci-fi teenage geek of me. So yeah, they managed to get. I mean. I can't say it.
Logopolis
got me a bit with all the mathematics and block transfer computation.
Yes.
Warrior's Gate was beyond me. You know, I was watching it for Romana and K9 leaving, but when you've got stuff like Castrovalva and the Big Bang Theory and stuff like that, as a teenager, I loved all that. It was like Doctor Who's taking itself seriously and is playing close to science. The Leisure Hive, the tachyonics, all that kind of stuff.
Love all that.
Now, I sent the thumbnail today about politics in Doctor Who, and one of the ones that everybody always mentions, so how can we not, is this. Curse of Peladon, Monster of Peladon. Everybody says, oh, well, it's the EEC debate about joining and Ted Heath and Harold Wilson and all that stuff. But obviously on the list here, you've got the miners' strike. The Monster of Peladon, there's an argument from some fans that actually the Doctor sides with the miners at a time when in the country, you know, we had a miners' strike. So basically the Doctor was maybe taking us to a side in politics. I mean, did you read this? I mean, some people don't like the Peladon stories, end of. I love them. But, and obviously I was too young to see the politics in them. The thing I don't like about the two Peladon stories is I got a bit bored with the miners by the second story. It's like, oh, not again. No. But I don't know, where in your lovely nostalgic heart are the Peladon stories?
I love them both, particularly Curse of Peladon. Of course, what you haven't mentioned is those two stories brought the Ice Warriors back.
Yeah.
And I absolutely love the Ice Warriors. And also, it was interesting to see, particularly with Curse of Peladon, it was exploring whether because we thought the Ice Warriors were kind of monsters, baddies, enemies.
Yeah.
But they weren't. They were just a different race. By the time of Curse of Peladon, they were members of this intergalactic federation headquartered in Brussels. So I thought that was brilliant. I was quite young at the time, so the politics did go over my head. I think with Monster of Peladon, the miners issue, I don't think the Doctor was sort of taking a really hard line in favour of the miners. I thought again it was almost going back to my Silurian's point. Let's try and find a solution here.
Yeah,
he was trying to find a solution, and the miners were loyal to the Crown as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think so. If anyone is saying that was a really kind of left-wing thing to do, I don't think it was. A little bit of political history as well in the UK at the time of the miners' strike. Some people who are either old enough or who know politics well enough will remember a British conservative politician called Enoch Powell, who was on the really hard right of the Conservative Party. He supported the miners.
Yeah.
He supported the miners because he said, in the marketplace, they're worth it. So I don't think you could say that Monster of Peladon was taking a really explicitly left-wing position. If anything, it was a relatively moderate, middle of the road, how can we find a solution position.
Yeah, I mean, and we've got the anti-religion again, the cynicism with this here. David Harding, the Peladon stories are okay, but I often confuse what happens in them. The first one uses the Ice Warriors as red herrings, but the second one shows them as the enemy again. Basically what we were saying earlier, which is good. I think that's when Doctor Who's good, because we've been saying in the politics tonight with Macroterror and other things to sometimes say, and the mutants don't judge a book by its cover. And that's a good political message really for kids, really, which is not to be quick to judgment. So yeah, I can buy into that one. For me, of course, I'm a Doctor Who fan, and I was a little kid then. The Peladon stories, you just had lots of monsters. The Ice Warriors I didn't know of course. And as soon as I saw the Ice Warriors, I first saw them in Monster, and then Curse when it was the Monsters season in the 1982, I think it was. And I got a shock. I can't believe it, because I read the Target book and I got a shock that the Ice Warriors weren't baddies. But I think, again, that's a good message. It's just, I think I got a bit bored as a kid, and as an adult when I watch them now. I just get a bit sick. Too much politics, as in the politics of the monarchy and the miners, and it's like, oh,
I'm the same. I'm not that. I don't mind the two stories. I think it was nice that they're connected. It was very rare for the Doctor to go back to an original story with the same characters. Like, I think it was set like 100 years after in the second story.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. But I was never kind of like, I was a bit sort of like, nah, it was all right. It was quite good. The Ice Warriors, just to go back to what we said earlier on, their redesign in New Who is really good. So you can redesign a classic villain and make them look good. And I like seeing them in the story. But as you say, it was quite a lot of political story issues in these two episodes, or two stories, which to me it was all right, but it never stood out as one of my favourites. It was just sort of there.
Well, one, when you mention politics that people do refer to, because it's a damn good political narrative. And I think this is one of our defining points, which is, of course, Doctor Who should do politics, a good political story. And of course, the one we're talking about is Deadly Assassin. And, yes, we know what Robert Holmes was getting at here. We know what his trigger was, the Manchurian conspiracy. Manchurian Candidate.
Candidate, yeah.
Yes. And so we know, that's fair enough. And as you said with the Hinchcliffe era, Simon, which you would love to go back to with the sci-fi horror, it's no problem when you make the seeds of doom from the Thing. The Mummy turns into Pyramids of Mars. There's no problem with that at all. With this one, there's a bit of Phantom of the Opera with the CIA, isn't it? There's a kind of I mean, this master is my favorite. I have to say, I cannot get over this master.
Yeah, it's
And
creepy,
again,
isn't it? Very
as we're
creepy.
talking and reflecting, please enjoy some of these photographs of rehearsals.
It's a beautiful photograph. Yeah.
So this is what I wanted to talk about, and obviously we'll focus on this story as well. But I wanted to talk about Gallifreyan politics, how how the Doctor was a person who escaped Gallifrey and eventually became High President, and that I thought that was quite an interesting aspect in Classic Who. About, and I mean, would you two have liked to have seen more of politics in Gallifrey about how the Time Wars rule and how it all works together? Even though it's fictitious, it's not obviously based on real politics, but could they have done something more in that aspect?
I think they could, and actually, we haven't had a real exploration, serious exploration of the Doctor leaving Gallifrey in the first place, what the issues were then. I mean, we know what he has said, but we haven't seen it. So there's potentially a story to be told there. Deadly Assassin, when it came out, was very, very unpopular with a number of older fans at the time. I was a member of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society, and the Dwas, most people who formed the Dwas were a few years older than me, and they really didn't like it at all because it contradicted the image of the Time Lords that they felt had been established in the War Games as these really superior, grand beings. What I'm quite surprised about with Deadly Assassin is that both in Robert Holmes' writing and in the design, you've got reference to cardinals, and the robes people wear very much look like sort of robes in the Catholic Church. Nobody, I think, has ever really criticised that, and I find that quite strange.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time that Deadly Assassin was on, I was a pupil at Cardinal Newman School, so you can guess what aspect of that school had. It was just never mentioned, and I'm really surprised nobody took offence at it. Maybe us Catholics don't take offence.
Yeah, well, Life of Brian.
Brilliant film. I love it.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I think we're used to it. So yes, I mean, I saw the cardinal bit myself as a Catholic, and as you did, and I thought, oh right, but the question from Michael was about the politics. Sorry, would we go further into this now? Do you know what my answer would be? Yeah. I actually agree with Russell Davies. He said we really should leave it. I think at least for if the series is going to keep going on, I think getting bogged down. One of my arguments tonight has been not to get too bogged down in all the intricacies of any political intrigue in every story. This was good enough, as in you've got the Master who seeks revenge and wants to humiliate his old foe, and you've got a political backdrop. World building done well here. The trouble is it was done so well that everybody's wanted to do it again, use it in the Five Doctors, use it in Arc of Infinity, and you think, leave it.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
I think Invasion of Time, Five Doctors, Arc of Infinity. Yeah. In those stories, no, I just don't think it was done as well. Although Invasion of Time, I think, is a lot better than I remember it at the time, to be honest. I still think there's a lot of good aspects to the story. I mean, in the new series, of course, we've seen Gallifrey a few times. I think it is probably right to have a big pause on it. But at some point, I think it would be nice to go back.
But it's been nearly 20 years now, isn't it, really, since Doctor Who came back in 2005. I don't know. I suppose you're right. I don't know what they can do with it.
My problem is, like we didn't like the Space Jesus element.
Yeah.
I don't like the Doctor he's been a president, he's been this. It's like he's become soiled by the establishment a little bit. He was a pariah, he was an outsider, he was I've forgotten the word they used when him and the Master were first described by the Time Lords, that they were I've forgotten what the word was, but they were seen as kind of dodgy. I don't he's now been president, and there's all that kind of, every time he goes back to Gallifrey, there's a reference to he has been president or something. And I'm thinking, and to be honest, the other thing is, My other criticism is of Timeless Children is origins and going so far back when we don't need to. It is called Doctor Who, but is with the Time Lords, we've now got Razalon, Omega, Barusa went bad, and I'm thinking I'm getting a bit sick of this now. It's like they're turning into gods as well. The worst space engineers, then this, then that. Oh, I don't know. I'm over it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, okay, yeah, makes sense.
You, Brenda, you just want to go back to the junkyard in Totter's Lane, don't you?
Do you know what? And in a way, Simon, I know it can't happen. I know that the horse is bolted, but I do think it. There's an element where that magic has been eroded, and I suppose a 61-year-old program will do that.
Natural, though, isn't it?
It is, and I can see where different showrunners, or a modern term, I know, or script editors have tried to maybe make the mystery come back. I mean, Andrew Cartmel and JNT did try that.
Cartmel did quite well on that, I thought.
Yeah, but then even when Cartmel did that, when we looked at a remembrance of the Daleks, etc., he went like the wizard again, didn't he? You know, it's like, why did we have the Hand of Omega? It's like, oh no, it's the Time Lords again. Why did he have? No, just leave it. So make him mysterious, but then suddenly he's mysterious, but he has all these contraptions from Gallifrey.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Divan and Dragon, what he said, good expression, Brendan. Doctor Who was co-opted and soiled by the very establishment he stands against. It is counter to his character. Yeah, this is what I mean. He's been compromised. And I know it's hard. And as I think Simon said earlier, the one thing about Doctor Who is it's been inconsistent. He's taken sides in different ways that make it look as though he's a different character. But yeah, Farsight, I love the way they're made into monastic chapters. Yeah, I did. I think it was brilliant world building. It really was. But maybe a one-off story like Marco Polo and just leave it. So, God, there were so many stories we could talk about. Are there any kind of notables we should mention before we finish?
Not a story, but I'd like to mention, because weirdly, except on the chat, nobody has mentioned the Cybermen.
Oh, yes. Good point.
So we've spoken about the Daleks as fascist. We know that the Cybermen started, and I can't remember who said it on the chat, so forgive me, but someone mentioned Kit Pedler, and who was a medical doctor, his concern about prosthetics and how far they might go. That's how the Cybermen started. I think they ended up as you. Well, I'm going to claim they ended up as communists because they wanted to make everybody like them. But they didn't think they were evil. They thought it was beneficial.
They thought it was the best thing for them. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So they wanted complete collectivism, everybody the same, no difference. So yeah, I think that's where we ended up. And we didn't, and we've only got a couple of minutes left. We didn't even discuss the Cold War, which, as well as the Second World War, went through much of Doctor Who's history.
Yes, it did.
Well.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
I mean, regarding that one, I had a shot from Armageddon Factor, which seemed to kind of just show that impasse in such a dramatic way. So there's the photograph. I offered the photographs. There's the set, and then there's the set from the Shadow. I love the Shadow.
Oh.
Of course, I thought it was the Master coming back. He did kind of look a bit Deadly Assassin Master, didn't he? But yes, we haven't said much about the Cold War, apart from Warriors of the Deep, really. Ezra Goldstein, the Cybermen are warning about transhumanism. Let's have a look. I can see Heather. I rather like the Doctor's a naughty, noble lord, so to speak. Yeah. I like stories on Gallifrey, though. It gives more to the Doctor's character to have him visit his home from time to time.
Yeah.
The Time Lords, says Farsight, have been ruined. The Doctor left because they were boring and stuffy. Now they're in many ways like the Doctor. I suppose, come on, RTD and anybody in the future. If there's good stories out there, do future stuff. Don't go back over. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I love to be nostalgic, but, don't go back over, please. Let's keep going forward.
Yeah, enough in the past, haven't we?
Yeah, Crimpline, good to see you. As a kid, I was so glad to be out of short trousers, but a moment perfectly timed for the arrival of flares, a minor blight on my childhood. That's the thing we can't erase in Doctor Who, which is the fashions. I mean, the 80s looks the 80s, the 60s looks the 60s. Definitely. JWC Reviews, good to see you there. The Cybermen are supposed to represent communism, so okay.
Yeah,
so
I never really clicked that, but that is obviously a fair point. That's very interesting, actually.
Yeah, although now they've turned into these cyber, you know what, they've gone.
I don't know what they are now.
They've gone very 1984, where basically the party are having wine and chocolates, and actually they're not following the rules at all. They're just hobnobbing. Yeah, Triple Jazz, who's still awake in Tasmania. My gosh. There is that exception in Kill the Moon where the Doctor made his companion as the human responsible for a massive decision. Yes, a shocker story, but that change of who takes responsibility was good. And then we'll just finish with Mad McCam. I feel a part 2 brewing. We do seem to focus on the right side of politics. There's enough for a whole episode discussing Cybermen. Mad McCam. Yes, I'm getting married. Yes, I'm going on holidays for a couple of weeks. There may be a Cyberman podcast I'm showing from early doors that you may not have seen, so look out for that one. Well called out. Right, lads. That was the show that was.
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because especially finishing with one of the Deadly Assassin as an example. You told me, Simon, when you were the founder of Skaro fanzine, that you were aware of all those debates about Deadly Assassin not landing well with some fans.
Yeah, the older fans. Yeah.
And now we've turned into those. So whether are we reactive or
we're much older than they were at the time. We're vintage.
We're vintage. So thank you very much for your time, Simon, and I hope you come on again after I've had my holes. And Michael, great to see you on again.
Thank you, Brendan. Always appreciate coming on board. Really kind.
We should say best of wishes to you and your intended for your.
Oh, I know that obviously goes for me as well. Congratulations. I think it really goes well for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I might as well just say where I'm going, so therefore people know. So I'm getting married, and so therefore it's just you're just sharing it. So thank you. My name is Charlie. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Paul Richards. Sometimes I have to stop streaming and have to get on with a bit of life. So thank you, lads. I've really enjoyed that. There may be a part 2 and maybe the Cybermen, but have a good night and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.